Data in helps you get data from an external source and use that data in your web app. In this panel, you can build requests and change, sort, or filter incoming data. Before we can start using data in, we have to connect to an app from which we're going to get data. Once that's done, we can set up our first request. To do that, go to the upper right corner of the panel and click on the New Request button. This button will open the request modal where you can name your request and choose the source of your data. Depending on the source of data, you might be using a built-in integration or a custom REST API. REST APIs can be a little bit tricky, so we're going to cover this in another lesson. With built-in integrations, all you have to do is select the right options from the dropdowns. The content of the dropdown might vary based on the integration you're using. For Airtable, you can choose whether you would like to build an authentication request or a database request. Next, you have to choose whether you want to get a single item or record or a list of items. Finally, you have to select the right base. In case you're requesting a single item, you will also have to provide the item ID. Once you build a request, you can choose to sort, filter, and limit incoming data. With Airtable, it's super easy to filter based on a view, but if you need a more advanced setup, you can click on the plus icon. The sorting modal consists of two dropdowns. The sort by field allows you to choose which field will be used for sorting items. Later, you can choose whether you want the items to be sorted in an ascending or descending order. The limit modal allows you to limit the number of items that are going to be fetched. For example, you can choose to fetch only the first 3 items, regardless of how many items you have in that request. Once you configure a request, you need to set up a trigger, otherwise the request will never get executed. In this panel, you can set the request trigger to execute the request on page load or on a variable condition. Note that you can also configure requests in the Actions panel. For a more advanced setup, you can also create some conditional logic. This means that the request will be triggered only once the condition evaluates to true. In our example, we're going to set the trigger to a simple page load request. And finally, you can choose what happens once the request has been executed. Here, you can choose any of the following options. You can perform another request, you can set a cookie, you can set a variable, or you can navigate to another page. In the response section, you can see all the fields which you received in the request. Note that if the response is an array, only the first item will be shown here. This response can be used in many ways, including rendering lists on the page, replacing content on your site, creating conditional logic, creating CSS classes, and much more. But the response values are not the only values that you can use when building your app. You can also use the request states. For example, you might decide to show or hide certain elements, whether the request has been executed or not. Each request has these 2 dimensions: in progress or completed, and successful or unsuccessful. You can use these 4 states the same way you use any other field from the response values. Finally, we have Request Overview, which gives you, as the name suggests, an overview of your request. You can see here the trigger and what happens after the request. We are going to cover the Data In panel in much more depth in future videos, where we're going to teach you concepts such as conditionals and how to use logic in your app. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.